Every other game in this series gives you something dramatic to work with, a palace to hold on to, a presidency to rebuild, an island to liberate. Lawgivers II gives you a legislature. No explosions, no coup, no propaganda towers to blow up, just the institution itself grinding forward slowly with a lot of people who don't fully agree with trying to get something done anyway. After 3 episodes about the drama of power, this is the episode about what power looks like when it's working correctly. All right, we're playing as the secretary of the SPD, the Social Democratic Party of Germany. Center left, one of the oldest democratic socialist parties in Europe, founded in the 19th century. In the real world, the SPD has been in and out of German government for over 100 years. They know what they're doing institutionally, even when the politics are rough. In Lawgivers II, that history doesn't matter mechanically. What matters is where we sit right now, how many seats we have, who we need to build a majority, and what we're willing to trade to get there. Quick orientations. Germany's political system, both real and in Lawgivers II, is a proportional representation parliament. Seats are distributed based on share of the vote, not winner-take-all district. The practical consequence is that there's no single party usually wins an outright majority. You almost always need a coalition. The SPD doesn't have enough seats to govern alone, which means before we pass a single bill, we have to figure out who we're governing with, and that negotiation is the first real political act of the whole episode. This is the coalition menu, and this is where Lawgivers II earns its place in this series. Bakken argues that simulation games that embed players in systemic consequence, where your decisions ripple outward in ways you can't fully predict or control, produces civil reasoning as a byproduct of engagement rather than instruction. Lawgivers II is built almost entirely on that principle. The coalition menu isn't a puzzle to solve, it's a system to live inside of. Every potential partner sits somewhere on the political spectrum with specific policy demands. Move too far toward one and you alienate the other. Accept too many demands and your own party's base starts to erode. The coalition that gets you into government might not be the coalition that lets you actually govern. That's not a game mechanic. That's parliamentary democracy in most of the world. Now, in this first coalition that we try to build, even though we held a practical majority in the Reichstag, which is Germany's parliament, we didn't hold enough. We held just over 30%, but to actually get anything done, we need closer to 50. And since the parties we tried to work with didn't agree on this coalition, we lost the coalition, and that gives the opposition the ability to build a coalition, and that's exactly what they did. They were able to successfully form a government. Now, even though we don't own the coalition or own the government, we still have the presidency, but we don't have the chancellorcy, which holds significantly more power. We can still legislate. And Lawgivers II's bill system is worth spending a lot of time on because it's doing something most political games skip. In most political games, policy is abstract. You build a thing, a meter goes up. Done. Lawgivers II makes you actually draft legislation. You pick policy area, decide how strong the measure is, put in some different policies into that law. Think about which parties it will attract and which it will repel, and then introduce it and see what happens. Deshawn and Kafafi argued that the serious game paradigm, the idea that only games designed explicitly for civic education can produce civic learning, misses the point. Commercial games that generate what they call civic connections through systemic engagement are doing the exact same work. Lawgivers II is proof. The bill drafting mechanic was designed for gameplay, not instruction, and it teaches the gap between policy intent and legislative outcome better than most civic curricula. Now, before we can actually get the bill before the entire Reichstag, before the parliament, we first need to get it passed through committee. Now, thankfully, our bill on privacy rights does pass committee with enough votes. Now that it's actually before the entirety of the Reichstag of the parliament, we have to wait and see if it does pass the vote and get passed in the law. Awesome. So it did pass in the law, which means soon our German citizens will actually be able to have these amazing privacy rights. Now, as the opposition party, we don't really have a coalition, which means that we don't have to touch as much with the other parties. We should still build alliances. I'm going to build some alliances with the Green Party because they are a particularly strong force. They are currently a coalition partner in the current government, which makes a logical part. This is where Caesarin and Lawgivers II are modeling the same thing at different scale. In Caesarin, making a deal meant a conversation with a named person who remembered it afterward. In Lawgivers II is a party block with a position you need to move. The interpersonal texture is gone, but the structural logic is identical. You want something, they want something, and the question is whether they want is something you can give without losing something more important elsewhere. Naez and Genez describe this as civic competency, performed through play. You're not learning about legislative negotiation, you're enacting it. And enactment produces a different kind of understanding than description. You know what it costs to get a bill through because you paid the cost. Also, we're playing in sandbox mode, which removes the money pressure, but it doesn't remove consequences. What we passed earlier is showing up now. This is a system I want game developers and world builders watching this to pay the most attention to. Lawgivers models policy with time delay. What you do in a year one shows up in year three. The bill that seemed like a reasonable compromise turns out to have a consequence nobody fully anticipated. The coalition partner you satisfied short term becomes a problem later because they keep demanding their demands keep coming. Bakken identified this temporal dimension as one of the key features of simulation games that produce genuine civic reasoning. The experience of consequence unfolding over time, not immediately, but eventually, in ways that force players to think about governance as a long term system rather than a series of individual decisions. That's what Lawgivers 2 has that no other game in the series fully replicates, and it what most political world building is missing. Something the other games in this series don't model that Lawgiver 2 does is the internal politics of the party itself. The SPD isn't monolithic. No real party is. Inside the party, there are people who want to move faster, people who want to move slower, people who think the coalition was a mistake, people who want to prioritize different issues. Managing that internal tension while also managing the coalition, while also legislating is a full job. Tropico managed island-wide factions, Suzerain managed advisors in the cabinet room, Lawgivers too, as a layer neither of those touch. You're also managing the people who are supposed to be on your side, and sometimes that's the hardest negotiation of all. Now, as the opposition party at this moment, we're able to act as the opposition where our goal is to block bills that we don't agree that the majority party, the party in power, wants to pass. And exactly in a healthy democracy, that's what opposition party does in real life. Serve a function beyond trying to win the next election. They scrutinize legislation, represent constituencies the governing coalition isn't prioritizing, and provide an alternative when the government loses public confidence. And again, as opposition, we still have real teeth. Even though we don't hold full power, we can still block and propose amendments, build our own support, and that friction, annoying as it is in gameplay, is exactly what democratic accountability is supposed to look like. The system working as designed doesn't feel like winning. It feels like this slow, contested, full of interruptions from people who don't agree with you. That's kind of the point. All right, here's what all four episodes together have been building. Tropico showed you power held by manipulation. Suzerain showed you power held by decision making under pressure. Just Cause 3 showed you power contested by force. Lawgivers 2 shows you power exercised through process. And process is the least exciting of the four, but it's also the most important because the thing that separates liberal representative democracy from every other system we covered in the intro episode is exactly this: the existence of a legitimate, functional process for making collective decisions without anyone having to pick up a weapon. Deshaun and Khalifa's argument, or Kafifa's, sorry, is that civic gaming doesn't require civic games. It requires games that generate civic connections, moments where players encounter the logic of governance and are changed by the encounter. However, slightly, every game in the series did that. None of them were designed to. That's the argument. In Lawgivers II, the most procedurally honest of the four is the place where that argument completes itself. Process is slow, is full of compromise, it produces results that satisfy nobody completely, and it is by a significant margin the best mechanism humans have developed for governing themselves without descending into violence. Lawgivers 2 isn't the most dramatic game we cover. No explosions, no coup attempts, no propaganda towers to destroy, just the grind of democratic governance, the bills, the coalition, the compromise. The slow accumulation of decisions that add up to something over time. But for game developers and world builders watching the series, this is the episode I'd come back to, because the political systems that feel most alive in fiction aren't the ones that with the most drama. They're the ones with the most texture. Faction dynamics that create real tension, policy consequences that take time to surface, internal party pressure that complicates external coalition management. That texture is what Lawgivers 2 has. That texture is what good political world building needs, and now you know what it looks like.